Right now, somewhere on this planet, two people are nervously texting each other, overanalyzing punctuation. One person stares at their phone, wondering whether a period will make them seem cold. The other sends a meme instead of saying what they actually feel because the meme feels safer, less vulnerable, less risky. Both are, underneath, terrified of rejection. Did our ancient ancestors do this too? About 3.5 million years ago, the beings that preceded us were not fully human. They belonged to genera like Australopithecus, small-brained, walking upright, not exactly writing sonnets. Yet there is a striking change in social behavior that shows up very early. Over millions of years of trial and error and failed pairings, a process began that eventually produced what we now call love. Before bipedalism became the norm, many primates resembled modern gorillas. Large males, much smaller females, and one dominant male controlling mating access through force and intimidation. Think of it as an ancient system where physical dominance determined reproductive rights. When our ancestors began to walk on two legs, male and female body size differences, what scientists call sexual dimorphism, started to shrink. Males stopped getting so much larger than females. That shift matters because in animals, the degree of size difference often signals the species mating system. Large differences typically point to one male, many female systems. Smaller differences often accompany pair bonding and long-term partnerships. As hominins became bipedal, the biological conditions that could support pair bonds began to form. It was not instantaneous or neat, but the process had started. The moment an ancestor stood upright was, in a physical sense, a first step toward the possibility of long-term attachment. One underrated discovery in prehistoric romance is mate provisioning. The term sounds clinical, but it describes one of the oldest forms of what we now recognize as romantic behavior. Around 1.8 million years ago, with Homo erectus on the scene, archaeologists find evidence of systematic food sharing that goes beyond group-level reciprocity. There are traces that males obtained resources and brought specific items back for particular females and their offspring. From an evolutionary perspective, that behavior makes sense only if the male had reasonable assurance the children were his. Otherwise, spending energy and risking danger to feed unrelated offspring would be maladaptive. The most plausible explanation is that men and women formed preferential, long-lasting bonds, an implicit agreement that this partner and these offspring were yours to support. In plain terms, someone went out, faced danger, and returned with food for a particular person. That practical act, bringing back provisions for a partner, appears in the archaeological record long before language or controlled fire. In a world of hyenas, rivers, and rival groups, choosing to allocate scarce resources to one person was a meaningful, concrete expression of commitment. Food was not the only early expression of romantic preference. By roughly 100,000 years ago, and perhaps earlier, humans began decorating themselves in ways previously unseen in the history of life. Archaeologists have recovered pierced shells used as necklaces at North African sites, ochre pigments applied to skin, carved ivory beads, and feathers used as ornament. Why spend time on such items when survival was precarious? The best explanation is sexual selection. Charles Darwin proposed that some traits evolve not for survival, but for attracting mates. The peacock's tail is the classic example. Human decoration signaled competence, the ability to imagine and create, the skill to craft objects, and access to resources needed to invest time in aesthetics. Those signals communicated, in effect, I am a desirable partner. We still do this today, dressing for dates, choosing profile photos. The materials changed, shells into gemstones, ochre into cosmetics, but the underlying motive remained the same. A detail that surprised many researchers is the presence of identical shell beads at sites separated by hundreds of kilometers. That pattern implies trade or exchange networks. Objects traveled long distances, which means someone intentionally selected and gave a meaningful gift to another person. That movement of goods suggests not only aesthetic value, but social value. An item that had relational importance and was chosen to be given. The archaeological trace of long-distance gift exchange reads like an early version of, "I saw this and thought of you." If you pause on that image, it has emotional weight. We should also correct a persistent myth. Prehistoric human mating was not simply strongest male wins. Male competition existed, broken bones attest to it, but the one dominant male model is an oversimplification when applied to hominins. Humans are cooperative breeders. Human infants are extraordinarily helpless at birth compared with many other mammals. A newborn deer may stand and walk within hours. A human infant depends on adult care for years. This extreme dependency makes raising children effectively impossible for a single caregiver in many environments. Two caregivers cooperating produce far better survival outcomes. That reality changes mate choice. A woman seeking a mate values not just strength, but reliability. Someone who will return with food, help during pregnancy, protect over years. Men faced a different incentive structure as well. Investing in a partner and shared offspring could improve reproductive success more than pursuing many short-term mates. From these pressures emerged attachment, an urge to prefer and remain with a particular partner over alternatives. Attachment supports coordinated child-rearing and long-term cooperation, which in turn shaped social life. That naturally raises the question, did ancient humans actually feel emotions like we do? Or were their behaviors purely automatic? We cannot scan ancient brains, but evidence points toward real emotional life. By about 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had brain architecture comparable to ours. The limbic system, the neural substrate for attachment, fear, pleasure, and grief, existed. Neurochemicals linked to pair bonding, dopamine, oxytocin, vasopressin, were present. The biological machinery for feelings we call love was in place, which makes it likely those feelings occurred. Archaeology adds further clues. Excavations at Shanidar Cave in Iraq in the 1950s uncovered a Neanderthal skeleton with clear, severe injuries. A withered right arm, healed fractures, possible vision impairment. In a pure survival of the fittest scenario, such injuries would have reduced life expectancy sharply. Yet this individual survived for decades after those injuries. The bone record shows long-term care by others, food, protection, continued provisioning. Despite the injured person's limited ability to reciprocate labor, that pattern indicates sustained care beyond simple resource optimization. It suggests attachment and compassion were part of the social fabric. Neanderthals shared a close genetic relationship with us and interbred with Homo sapiens. For many people outside Africa, Neanderthal DNA remains in genomes today. If Neanderthals engaged in caregiving that looks like love, it bolsters the case that ancient Homo sapiens experienced similar emotional bonds. Jealousy is another lens into prehistoric attachment. From an evolutionary standpoint, jealousy can be understood as a protective response. If you invest time and resources in raising offspring with a partner, threats to that bond can jeopardize your genetic lineage. The brain treats such threats seriously, producing hormonal changes that narrow attention and trigger protective behaviors. In some cases, those behaviors can be violent. Cross-cultural studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer groups consistently show that a sizable share of male violence links to mate competition and suspected infidelity. That pattern suggests jealousy has deep roots. Yet the same neurochemical systems that produce possessiveness also produce loyalty and commitment. Vasopressin, for example, can drive both protective behavior and steady devotion. Feeling jealous means you are operating on ancient neural programs that evolved to preserve pair bonds. You are not malfunctioning. You are running mechanisms shaped by long-term selection. Music offers another powerful piece of the story. The oldest confirmed musical instruments are flutes carved from vulture bone and mammoth ivory, found in caves in southwestern Germany and dated to about 40,000 years ago. Those instruments are carefully made and intended to produce specific tones. But perishable instruments and vocal music leave little archaeological trace, so music almost certainly predates those flutes by a large margin. Music functions across cultures as an emotional medium in courtship, singing to attract a partner, coordinated dance as a test of synchronization, rhythms and melodies that convey states words may not capture. Darwin proposed music evolved partly through sexual selection, much like ornamental traits. In practice, someone near an Ice Age hearth could have played a bone flute or used their voice to communicate feeling across a fire, effectively saying, "I made this for you. Do you feel it too?" That capacity to use sound to connect matters deeply for the evolution of attachment. On monogamy, evidence suggests humans were socially monogamous, with some instances of polygyny. In plain terms, most people formed one-on-one partnerships that the group recognized and supported, while exceptions and flexible arrangements occurred. The modest sexual dimorphism in humans places our mating system between the strict polygyny of gorillas and the near-perfect monogamy of gibbons. Cultural norms then shaped how rigid or flexible those pair bonds became. Anthropological surveys of hunter-gatherer societies show polygyny is often permitted, but most actual pairings are one-on-one and socially reinforced. Ancient relationships were not flawless. Jealousy, conflict, and violence appear in the record. Still, pair bonding, the choice of two people to partner and raise offspring together, was central. Putting this together, love is not a modern invention of cities, literacy, or romantic poetry. It predates agriculture, written language, and controlled fire. Pair bonding likely encouraged developments in language. Partners needed more than grunts to coordinate. And in music and art, new ways to signal and communicate preference. Attachment promoted cooperation beyond the nuclear unit, extending care to children and then to wider community ties. Those bonds supported larger social structures. In that sense, human social complexity emerged alongside, and partly because of, long-term attachments. Imagine a Homo sapiens at a campfire 100,000 years ago, feeling an awkward warmth for someone who sits across the flames. They may have lacked the words we use now, but the experience, the confusion, fear, attraction, and hope was recognizable. The shell necklace gifted, the shared food, the music sent across a fire, different artifacts, same emotional impulse. So the next time you hesitate over whether to use a period in a message, or you feel that dizzy, exposed sensation of caring for someone more than you planned, remember this: you are participating in a very old human pattern. Your ancestors felt similar things. They handled those feelings imperfectly, sometimes cruelly, sometimes tenderly, yet often well enough to keep passing on life. Against floods, ice ages, predators, and rival groups, each generation did enough to reach the next. If you think about that, it is one of the most literal reasons you exist.